Bing. All right. Well, good evening. How are you guys doing tonight? Little better than it was a couple of Wednesday nights ago when it was below zero and all that. This is much nicer. But thank you guys for coming tonight. It's great to have you here. We are on class 45. Tonight we're going to be talking about the prophet Elijah. We talked about him a little bit last week. We kind of started it and introduced that. And this week we're going to move on and go into more of his story. And we have some pictures. Just a few, but pictures are always fun. So tonight we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter and time. In the third year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Now remember, in the third year they're talking about here was Elijah, when we left him off last week, told King Ahab that there would not be rain in the land until he said so. Said, you're going into a drought, buddy. And so 3 years later, Elijah's been hiding out for 3 years. 3 years later, he comes back, and he wants to know, basically, if Ahab has had enough. He's like, you ready to start listening? Can we talk now? Have I got your attention? And so 3 years later, he came back, and it says, go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. So even in Ahab's little household there, his administrator still believed in the one true God. But he was serving Ahab as the king. And so he was definitely in a minority, especially in the house of Ahab. And it says, while Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. So Ahab was so upset that not only did he decide that he was going to kill Elijah and had basically a hit out for him, anybody who could find him and bring him to him, but he started killing the other prophets of God and the other people who believed in God. He was just kind of cleaning house and saying, I'm done with the God of Israel. And so he started killing off these prophets. And Obadiah, his administrator, saw what he was doing, and so he took 100 prophets that were left in all of Israel, and he took them and he hid them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and then he was sneaking them food and water so that they could be spared. Because, again, if they came out in the open, Ahab was going to have them killed. And so he was hiding them there until whatever time, And so Ahab had said to Obadiah, go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive so we will not have to kill any of our animals. And it's interesting that it's Ahab sending out Obadiah, but it also is very telling because he says horses and mules in particular. What this is showing is he's saying we need to find a little bit of pasture land somewhere. And again, up in Samaria, this is the greenest part of Israel. This is where most of their farming and stuff was done. He says we need to find enough green to keep our horses and mules alive, which is pretty much meaning we're down to the necessities of like the military and stuff. Horses and mules were not so much used for plowing and that kind of thing. They were more of a military and administrative thing. And so Ahab was down to the point where he's like, now it's affecting the state. We have to start killing off our war horses and our mules that we have here for the palace and everything else. So this is getting serious. And so Ahab said, we got to find enough grass to at least keep these kind of animals alive. The other ones they've kind of written off already after three and a half years, I think it says in Luke, 3.5 years of drought that they had suffered through. It says, so they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in the another. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, is it really you, my lord Elijah? Yes, he replied, go tell your master, Elijah is here. So Ahab is out looking, Obadiah goes the other way, and lo and behold, runs into Elijah right away. So Elijah has this simple message, God has sent me back here to end the drought, essentially. So go tell Ahab, I'm back, I'm here. And Obadiah's response is great. because, again, I think it tells you a little bit more about Ahab. But Obadiah's was, what have I done wrong? Asked Obadiah. Elijah goes, just go tell your boss I'm here. He's like, what did I ever do to you, man? And he goes, what do you mean? He goes, why, you want me to take message to him? Oh, you got to be kidding me. And so Obadiah's like, oh, come on, don't do this to me. And it goes, that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death. He's like, you've just signed my death warrant. Ahab is so mad at you about this and stuff, and I'm supposed to walk into him and say, oh, Elijah's back. He's going to take it out on me. Plus, he said, as surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you, except Phoenicia right next door, because that's where he was the whole time. But he said he sent them out every place he could think of, and man, is he upset. And whenever a nation claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. And so he was sending out people to every place. And it says, but now you tell me to go to my master and say, he says, I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave. And if I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. So he says, Elijah, you're not exactly known for sticking around in one spot. And so if I go in and say, Ahab, Elijah's back, and he says, okay, great, go get him, bring him in, and I come back out here, and he's going to kill me. Because he's going to think either I'm lying to him, or I'm in cahoots with you somehow, and I let you escape. Like, to send me back to Ahab alone, that's not going to really work, because, he's going to want to kill me. It says, yet I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me to say, go to my master and say, Elijah is here. He will kill you. Elijah said, as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today. So he says, no, trust me. I'm on official God business. Go tell him, get back to your palace. Elijah's on his way. And he said, basically, as surely as the Lord lives, I will be there. We'll show up today. And Obadiah's walking back to the palace the whole time going, man, I hope he shows up. Oh, I hope he doesn't take off some other direction. So it says, so Obadiah went to and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, is you troubler of Israel? Ahab, after 3 or 3.5 years, is still blaming Elijah. You did this to me. He thinks that somehow Elijah is the one who has brought this drought upon, that Elijah has the power to control this. And Ahab is still not in his brain connecting that this is a punishment from God because of his. So his immediate response is, you did this to me, Elijah. You're the one responsible for this. You're the one who's wrong. And so he's blaming Elijah, and he's angry at him when really the whole time, this whole thing is about God getting his attention and saying, I promised Israel that if you stayed faithful to me and worshiped me, you would never suffer a drought like this. But yet Ahab in his disobedience led the country astray. God was proving his word and showing them, this is what I told you would happen, and here it is. And Elijah said, it's because of your disobedience to God. This is why it's coming. And he just can't put it together. It's not my fault. It's Elijah's fault. He's the troubler of Israel. And it says, I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people of Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent word throughout all prophets of Carmel. Now, Mount Carmel. It's kind of out of the way. It's way off west and up to the north, and why would that be the spot? Why not someplace more central? Whatever. But there's actually probably more in it than we even give it credit for. Number one, they've had 3.5 years of drought. I find grass for a drought, and the irony of that is, Paul is the God, with their God, God of harvest, fertility, and thunder and rain. And so for 3.5 years, their God has been silent. Otherwise, they'd have rain. They'd have crops. They'd have growth. But nothing. God shut down everything that their God was known for. This is what we pray to him for, and they haven't heard a thing. The other reason is, why Mount Carmel? Well, because Baal was the one that they were worshiping is a Phoenician god. It came back with Jezebel. And so it was Jezebel, if you remember, when she married Ahab, that brought this worship into Israel, and she brought her own prophets and stuff with her. Mount Carmel is about as far north as you're going to get without stepping into Phoenicia. And so it's right there kind of on the border. And so I think that Elijah was kind of sticking another finger in Baal's eye and saying, not only am I going to call this tournament between gods, I'm going to do it on your home court, essentially. We're going to stay in Israel because this is Ahab's country. This is the area of Israel. But he said, I'm going to put it right on the border. I'm going to come up to your homeland. This is where it should be a piece of cake for you to make it rain. We're in the wettest part of the country. We are right next to the Mediterranean Sea. It's right there. And we're going to be up here on top of this mountain, and we're right next to your homeland. This is your home turf. This should be so easy for you to bring a little moisture out of the Mediterranean and make it rain here, whatever you want to do. So he says, let's go up here, and we're going to call on the gods, and I'm going to do it right on your front porch and see if you will answer anybody. So that was what this is. So a few pictures. This is a statue that is up on Mount Carmel today. It's at a place, and so it's after the harvest. It's kind of when things have been cleaned up a little bit. They're waiting for the new rainy season so they can plant and everything. But you can see that everything out there in front of you is basically agricultural. This is the breadbasket of Israel. This is what's called the Jezreel Valley. And the hills on the back side of that, if you go straight across in the middle, you're actually looking at some of the hills that would be like for Nazareth in that area, and Mount Tabor right behind it. And so you're looking across that valley, and this next shot is the same valley, but you're looking to the south a little bit. And so you can see the mountain range kind of going down. It kind of curves back into the picture as you go down. Right about where it curves is where Megiddo is. So the Jezreel Valley is also the Valley of Armageddon, the Valley of Megiddo. And so that's kind of logistically where we're at with that. But you can see also that, like I said, this is the breadbasket. This is where all the farming was taking place. And after 3.5 years of drought, this was desolate. Nothing. The other thing, and I think it's probably going to be really difficult to see, is there's a little green strip that runs right there and goes up and kind of goes up. Green strip that runs right there and goes up and kind of goes up like that. And then it kind of turns back. But anyway, that is the Kishon River that we're going to be talking about a little bit. The Valley of Kishon is just kind of off to the, as you're looking at it to your left, back there, but that's the river that comes out of it, and it's just kind of a green strip of trees once everything's been harvested around it and everything's kind of in the drought or dry season here. But that's the area that we're looking at with this. So it says, Elijah went before the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? So it's a very simple question. He says, you are the people of Israel. How long are you going to waver between two opinions, meaning how long are you going to play around with two gods? You're saying you're Israel, you're the people of the one true God, the one that Israel has worshipped, and then you're also playing around and you're worshiping Baal, and you're offering sacrifices to him and stuff. So he says, you're divided. The whole country's divided. It's the house divided situation. He says, how long are you going to waver? between these. If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. Real reminiscent of when you have Joshua coming into the land and looking at the people and say, choose you this day whom you will serve. Same situation here with Elijah. He's like, you know what? We need to settle this. If God is God, then worship him. Stop playing around with the other gods and idols. But if Baal is God, then stop worshiping the God of Israel. Because there's only one. And so we have to decide which one it is. You need to choose who your champion is going to be and stick with it. And let that one decide your fate. And so he just lays it out for him. And it says, but the people said nothing. Perfect response, right? I don't know who to worship. And so he says, okay, we got a way to do this. Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, except for the 100 in the cave, hiding away. But they ain't going to come out and say anything. So he says, I'm it. I'm the only one brave enough to stand up here at this moment in front of Ahab. But Baal has 450 prophets. I'm a little outnumbered. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophet choose one for themselves. Elijah says, I'm going to prove this is not fixed. We're going to have equal things, and of those equal things, you choose first. You take what you want, and I'll take the leftovers. And you take your 450 prophets, and I'll stand here by myself. And let's go ahead and settle this. So it says, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bowl and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. Then all the people said, what you say is good. He says, this is a simple little test. After all, Baal's the god of thunder and lightning and rain and all that. Send a lightning bolt. Light this sucker up. That's all he's got to do. You got 450 of you here. You call on your God, and you've got this bull sitting here on the firewood. Everything's prepared. The altar is built. All he's got to do is send a spark. Get it burning. That's it. I'll do the same. I'll take the same materials. I'll take the same kind of bull. I'll prepare it. I'll set it on the fire, and I will call on God, and we'll see who answers. It's a very simple test. And the one who answers by fire is the one who is God, and that's who you should worship from now on. The other one is a fake. He's a fraud. So, straightforward, right? Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted, but there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar that they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. And it's really funny because Elijah's like sitting back, just waiting for his opportunity. And they're out there, these 450 guys, and they're dancing around the altar. And they've been praying since early in the morning. And it's now noon, and now it's afternoon. And they're still dancing around. They're trying everything they can, and they're getting no response. Why are they getting no response? Because they're praying to no God. There is no God. And so they just keep going. And it says, shout louder, he said. Surely he's a God. Just shout a little loud. He can't hear you. Acoustics aren't real good up here on the mountain. I know we're kind of close to him, but shout a little louder. Maybe the cloud cover or something. And then it says, perhaps he is deep in thought. You caught him in the morning before noon, and maybe he was meditating or something. And so, Baal's probably studying or something like that, or in deep meditation. He's in deep thought. He's thinking about all the things that he has to do on this world. So that's probably why you didn't get a response. But now maybe he's awake and available now. It's afternoon, so keep streaming. Maybe he's busy. And that's the one that Ryan was talking about last week, is busy. When you look at that, go back and look at it in the Hebrew, it says basically maybe he's relieving himself. Maybe you've been calling and he had to go, in the little room. And so keep shouting, he'll be done soon. And when he comes back out, surely he's going to answer your prayer. Or maybe he's traveling. Maybe he's gone off up into northern Phoenicia or something, and he can't hear you. But he'll be back. He's a guy. You got 450 of you here. Surely he's going to listen to you guys. And you've got all the prophets of Asherah here too that are in the background. And that's Asherah's Baal's cohort. It's his woman. So it's like, hey, get them singing. Let's get this party going. Come on, get him down here. It says maybe he's sleeping or must be awakened. Maybe if you bang some pots and pans, I don't know. So they shouted louder and they slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. They started cutting themselves, thinking that maybe it would get Baal's attention. Maybe he would have sympathy or pity on them because they were maiming themselves and cutting themselves and letting their own blood out onto this altar. And they're screaming and yelling and dancing and doing everything they could. And Elijah's back there going, really? This is all you got? And they're just doing anything they can think of to try to get the attention. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice, but there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Again, Elijah, from the start, he knew the fix was in. There is no Baal. There is no God there. And so he's like, scream and yell all you want. Bring all the people you want. Cut yourself, sing, dance, scream, yell, do whatever you want. You got all day. And so he literally gave them from morning until evening, the evening sacrifice, and said, have at it. And he sat there through the whole day listening to this. No response. Not a flash of lightning or a little crack of thunder or even a spark. Nothing. They're praying to nothing, and they received nothing. It's real simple math. And so there they stood. Then Elijah said to all the people, come here to me. They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord which had been torn down. He says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to use that altar. I'm going to repair this altar to God that you tore down, that you have defaced here. And so it says, Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seas of water. So this trench was huge. Around it, around this altar, digs this big trench. People are probably thinking, what's he doing? He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Elijah said, this isn't a fair fight. I know you've been screaming at your God all day with dry wood and a bull ready for sacrifice, but I just can't take advantage of you like that. So he says, I'll tell you what, I've put the wood on there, I've put the bull on there, I've built the altar, I've dug this trench. Go get me 4 large jars of water. And so the closest water would have probably been that Kishon River, and you can see, how high that hill was. And he's like, bring me 4 large jars. Okay. So they go down and they get 4 large jars of water, and they pour it on the offering and the wood. Now, I was only a Boy Scout for a little while, but the one thing I learned is if you want to start a fire, don't pour water on the wood. Okay? I didn't learn a lot about starting fires, but I did learn not a good place to start. Don't empty your canteen on the log and then try to light it on fire. So he says, pour it on there. Then he says, do it again. He said, and they did it again. Do it a 3rd time, he ordered. And they did it a 3rd time. He wanted to prove there is nothing dry in this whole altar. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. So he said, that's why I dug the trench, people. I made a little moat. And now it's full. And everything is soaking wet and water's dripping off of this thing. So he says, at the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Elijah was quick to mention, this isn't me. I'm not doing this. I don't have a Bic in my pocket or anything here. I'm not doing this. And even the prophecies that he had told about the drought and everything else, I'm not the one who brought them. Ahab, remember, calls him the troubler of Israel. He's reminding him, this isn't Elijah's deal. This is between you and God. And I'm just the messenger. And so it's God, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He is the one who we have called upon to take care of this altar. And so Elijah just kind of takes a step back. He says, answer me, Lord. Answer me so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God and that you are turning their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up all the water in the trench. That's a big woof. And it didn't take him dancing or screaming or cutting himself or anything else. He simply said, Lord, it's time for your sacrifice. Here it is. And he prayed that simple prayer, and God sent fire down and took care of that altar, the wood, the sacrifice, the water, the dirt, everything. Boom, gone. It says, when all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Then Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away. They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. So he brought all 450 prophets down into the valley there by that river and stuff, and he said, kill them all. Now, this is not Elijah being vengeful for the prophets that Ahab had killed. This is not Elijah saying, look at me. This is Elijah following the law. Go back and read the law of God. What do you do with false prophets? You put them to death. And he said, every one of these 450 people that danced around that altar, they are the ones who have been prophesying and telling you that Baal is God. Every one of them is a false prophet. Every one of them, according to the law of God, must die. They didn't do so well either. 850 that probably wound up getting killed, yeah. But they, he just said, these guys are false prophets. Put them to death. That's the law. That's what God demands of us. If he let them go, he would be ignoring the law himself. And he probably thought, well, that's a little bizarre to do after I just showed that God is God and we're to follow his decrees and his commands. I think we better follow it. And so he went and had them all put to death. And Elijah said to Ahab, go eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain. After 3.5 years, Ahab probably isn't really buying it. And probably not many other people are either. And Elijah's up on the mountain, and he says, Ahab, you might want to get well fed here. Eat the provisions you have and stuff like that, because there's a big rain coming. And it says, so Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. Go and look towards the sea, he told his servant. And he went up and looked. And I showed you the pictures. You can see the Mediterranean Sea from Mount Carmel. Back then they wouldn't have had as much smog probably, so it would have been a little easier. But go and look at the Mediterranean Sea. Tell me what you see. And it says, there is nothing there, he said, 7 times Elijah said, go back. The 7th time the servant reported, a cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. So Elijah said, go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. So the guy, is sitting there and he's looking out over the Mediterranean, and it's just this vast, sea in front of him. And each time he's like going, there ain't nothing. There ain't nothing. And then off in the distance, if you take a fist and put it up there, he goes, wait, there's a cloud. I see a cloud coming. Elijah goes, it's the one we've been waiting for. Here it comes. They just saw God respond with fire. Now he's going to respond with rain. And Elijah knew that was the answer, and that was the end of this drought that they were going to have. So he tells Ahab, if you're going to make it home, you better get going, because it's going to get bad. And again, we're not talking about interstates and highways here. He's got to cross across all that farmland. And he says, if you're going to get that horse and chariot home, you want to leave now, because this is going to be soup in just a few hours. And so it says, meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds, and the wind rose. A heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. I should have pointed out when I had the picture up there. I can put it up here in just a second again. But the hills on the back side of that, there's kind of a place where they dip down. There's a valley. That's where Jezreel, the city that they were going to. It's the Jezreel Valley, but the city is on the opposite side of it, kind of between where those mountains go down. That's where Jezebel was waiting. And so he said, a heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. So, a pretty good little jaunt. I don't know how well we'll be able to see it in these pictures, especially since they're not very big on that. Yeah, these are pretty hazy. But you can kind of see right, let me get my pen back, right in this area. There's kind of a hill that comes down this way and a hill that comes down this way. And Jezreel sits kind of in that valley right back in there. And so you can see kind of the distance that they were talking about. And he says, you better get going if you're going to get that chariot home. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and Elijah took off on foot and beat him in his chariot back across that valley and was there waiting for him. Yeah, that's a pretty good little run. Yeah, probably at least. Is that what it says? Yeah, I was going to say, it's at least 5 or 6 miles across that valley. I've been back and forth across it several times, but I'm in an air-conditioned tour bus. Isn't that bad? It's not that bad of a trip at all. But I don't want to run it, and I don't even know if I want to do it on a chariot. And so the Spirit came, Lord, and so he was there. This does not end his dealings with Ahab and Jezebel. You would think this would be the end of the plight, and Ahab would go back and go, oh my gosh, we've made a mistake. We need to get some altars built to the real one true God, and my heart has been changed. No. His heart was so hard that, again, his response is, I hate that, Elijah. Okay. And Jezebel's as bad or worse. Their response to this is, now we're going to kill you. Even when God displays his power in such a mighty way, those who refuse to see it still don't get it. They just don't get it. They have to be able to have their eyes open, and only the Holy Spirit can do that for them. They have to be willing to see what is right before them. And that's the way it still is with the Word of God. Once you have the Lord in your heart, or once your heart is open to his word, then it becomes so evident and so real. But as long as you have that barrier up and you are sitting on your own throne, so to speak, the words of the Bible don't even penetrate. Because you just say, no, I'm not going to listen. And that's really sad. I was watching a deal the other night, and this guy was talking about, he said, it's so much easier to dupe people than it is to convince them that they've been duped. It's easier to trick somebody than to try to explain to them how they've been tricked. And that's what the world has done. It has tricked so many people. And now when you bring the truth, it's so hard for them to accept that they've been tricked all along. And so that's what Elijah was up against, is here they were so hard to God and to his word and to his prophets that even when they were shown this kind of proof, they still didn't open their hearts. Nope. Baal's still God. No, just proved he wasn't. Not only could he not light the fire, not only did he not bring about any kind of sacrifice, he couldn't save his 450 prophets. That's something to think about too. He let them all die. Well, he didn't really let them die because he doesn't exist, so he couldn't have stopped them. But it was so hard for the people. But the initial people that saw it, they were won over quickly. But their heart was not as hard as Ahab and Jezebel's. So, all right. Well, thank you. We will continue the little discussion. People at home, if they're still at home, are they off? Okay, they're still there.